Thank you. Sure. Okay. Good afternoon. We're taking up the issue of competency evaluation. We should be able to do them under law. And we have with us Dr. Raven, Chief Medical Officer at the Howard Center. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
Thank you. Dr. Simi Rabin, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead with anything you want to tell us about whether the real question is whether psychologists, social workers, or others should be able to administer competency evaluations.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to speak to this committee. I'm happy to join you and share a little. First, I'll share a little bit about my background and then my perspectives on that question about expansion of the mental health professionals who may perform competence to stand trial evaluations in Vermont. So my name again is Dr. Simcha Ravin. I'm Chief Medical Officer at Howard Center and immediate past president at Vermont Medical Society. I'll share a little bit about my perspectives and then I'm happy to answer questions. So I've been asked to talk about the expansion of forensic evaluations to other mental health professionals, specifically competence to stand trial evaluations. To share some of my experience with forensic evaluations generally and competence to stand trial evaluations specifically. I'm a board certified adult and forensic psychiatrist. For the last 9 years, I've served on faculty at Yale Division of Law and Psychiatry. And my work there is, the core of it is focused on training forensic psychiatrists. So in that work, I perform close supervision of forensic psychiatry fellows. And those are physicians who've completed medical school, then had a residency in adult and child psychiatry, then gone through another year of training to learn how to perform evaluations, psychiatric evaluations for the courts. I work with them on interview and evaluation skills, and the core of what we do is, or the bulk of what we do is report writing. I also help them with skills for providing expert testimony. So in my work, I review a large number of forensic reports for quality. And in the past, I've also consulted to the Vermont Department of Mental Health on forensic report quality and oversight for quality control. In my work, I also lecture regularly at Harvard University and University of Vermont to trainees in different fields. Just to share, I also have a private practice in forensic psychiatry in Vermont, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, and that is exclusively performing forensic evaluations. Many of those are competence to stand trial evaluations. As you may know, I'm also an advocate for improvement of forensic mental health infrastructure and programming in Vermont, and very pleased to be here to talk with you. My understanding from my conversations with the Vermont Department of Mental Health is that currently board certified forensic psychiatrists perform the majority of court-ordered forensic evaluations, and that our legislation denotes that psychologists perform evaluations for individuals who have developmental disabilities. Psychiatrists who wish to perform forensic evaluations undertake rigorous education and testing, and forensic psychiatry fellowship is a 12-month full-time program with the focuses I've outlined. Forensic psychiatrists generally undergo board certification through the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. So when I was asked to speak to this committee, I reached out to colleagues at Yale who are forensic psychologists and reviewed material from the American Psychological Association as well. And doctoral level psychologists have in-depth training in mental health diagnosis and psychological testing, which can be used for diagnosis and other assessments. The dominant model to become a forensic psychologist, from what I understand from my research and my conversations with colleagues, is one where an individual earns a doctoral degree in clinical psychology and then subsequently pursues a postdoctoral specialization in forensic psychology. And they can then go on, an individual could then go on for board certification through the American Board of Professional Psychology, specifically in forensic psychology. So I would advocate for PhD psychologists who are board certified in forensic psychology to be able to perform competence to stand trial evaluations in Vermont. I think it's an in-depth and rigorous background that would expand the pool of well qualified and well-trained individuals. There are two important considerations that I think the committee might consider. Sometimes individuals who are very medically complex need to be evaluated for competence to stand trial. And there may be times when a medical professional would be more appropriate to assess an individual for competence to stand trial when there's a concern that there's a medical condition that's affecting their cognition and impairing their competence. Some examples of that are endocrine abnormalities like hyper or hypothyroid, a central nervous system tumor, some infectious or autoimmune processes. So that's one consideration where a physician would be a more appropriate evaluator. But in general, a board certified forensic psychologist is well qualified to perform these evaluations. The other consideration I wanted to note was the importance of rigorous oversight of quality of evaluations and reports in general for all evaluators. As we know, criminal defendants are entitled to have competence to stand trial evaluations and also be evaluated when raising the insanity defense. And our courts and psychiatric hospitals really rely on these written documents to inform both legal disposition and clinical treatment. And it's important that all of the reports and evaluations be of consistent and high quality, and that we have a system for oversight of quality of these reports. So that sort of sums up my prepared comments. I'd be happy to take any questions, and thank you.
Are there questions in the committee? Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Robin.
Confused between the two.
Sorry, we're just a little bit of confusion back and forth here. When you gave examples of when it might be preferable to have a physician perform or maybe work with, that's part of my question. Is there ever a situation where where the physician would work with a psychologist, a certified psychologist, to maybe do a joint evaluation of an individual? And then my second question is, would you consider Alzheimer's and dementia-related health conditions to be among those conditions that would require a physician to be at least part of the evaluation process?
So I'll answer your second question first. In my work with psychologists, I don't think that dementia and different kinds of dementia should be reserved only for psychiatrists. I think that's a topic that could be addressed by psychologists or psychiatrists. And the first question was about joint or team evaluations. I think that joint and team evaluations often work really well. In the evaluations I do with the group at Yale Division of Law and Psychiatry, we often have multidisciplinary teams with complementary expertise.
Thank you.
I think I was next.
Yeah,
Thank you. In your second consideration, you mentioned rigorous quality oversight of the reporting and the evaluations. Is that something that currently exists? Just wondering, because you brought it up as something that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, so I don't have a formal role with the Department of Mental Health but I was able to speak with Attorney Karen Barber prior to this meeting, and from what she described, the majority of the competence to stand trial evaluations that are court ordered are contracted through an organization called Innovatel, and they perform their oversight internally. But I am not aware of a quality oversight process for evaluations that are outside of that Innovatel contract.
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you. In the section that we've been asked to review, we're looking at doctor level psychologists, mental health providers, psychiatric nurse practitioners, and other professionals. So I'm hearing that that's not something you would necessarily support, psychiatric nurse practitioners or other professionals. That's right?
That's right. I would not endorse having other mental health professionals who do not have formal, rigorous training with board certification to perform forensic psychiatric evaluations.
Thank you.
I'm just reading a email from the victim. Her daughter was murdered by an individual who's being determined whether it's competent to stand trial or not. She says this was his fifth competency evaluation since 2018 and his third with the same expert. Can you explain to me how, if you've got one competency evaluation from Dr. X, why would you go back to Dr. X for another one if Dr. X said he wasn't competent or he was? Does this happen frequently?
Yeah, I'd be happy to address that. There have been some efforts to sort of streamline and look at models that don't have multiple repeated competence evaluations to use resources diligently. That may not be terribly unusual. So competence to stand trial is not a static determination. So an individual can be either an attorney or the court can request a competence to stand trial evaluation if they have concerns that an individual may not be competent. And so, for instance, an individual who has criminal charges and is before the court and has some impairment, either from mental illness or another process, and the court or their attorney has a concern that they're not competent and orders an evaluation. They're not found not competent, and then potentially after that they have treatment or an intervention that improves their cognition and mental state, and they can gain or regain competence. And then the legal process that they're engaged in can stretch on for some time, and the initial process or something or symptoms that were impairing their competence can reemerge. And they could have another evaluation ordered. And it's generally appropriate to have the same evaluator or a different evaluator, because it's an evaluation that assesses their ability to navigate the court process and work productively with an attorney at the time of the evaluation.
Thank you. Do other states do the same? The other states you work in?
Oh, are the other states I work in have the same
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that is something that is common to the states I work in.
Thank you. That's helpful. Other questions for Dr. Ray? Thank you very much, Doctor. Appreciate your being here and that's very helpful. Is Lauren Hibbett here or is she? I see Tom Powell is here. Why don't we go to Tom? Dr. Powell. I've known Tom for, I won't say how long, but lots of years. Nice to see you here.
Yeah, you did.
You're muted, Tom.
I appreciate the deference there to not mentioning the number of years, Senator.
It's hard for me to remember, but it's been a while.
Representative
before I got
Evans
into
may be able to
politics.
help too down those lines. We've all been
Yep.
together for a long time.
Yep.
My name's, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tom Powell. I'm a forensic psychologist in private practice in Shelburne, Vermont. I have an interesting history insofar as I began work with the Department of Corrections many years ago as a correctional officer. I was promoted up through the ranks as a probation officer and went away and got educated in forensic psychology for a while and came back and was the clinical director for the department for 16 years before I retired in 2004. And in 2004, I began this practice. I'm the founding partner. There's 4 of us. We're all doctoral psychologists who are doing exclusively forensic psychology work, which includes doing sentencing mitigation evaluations, competency evaluations. We oftentimes are asked to look at sanity questions. We do a lot of evaluations of risk assessment, threat assessments in schools, and a variety of different employment settings where they have employees who are in trouble in one way or another. And people call us up and one of us will get involved in doing evaluations like that. We oftentimes will testify in court as experts. We are very comfortable in all the courts, both state and federal in Vermont, going in and testifying, and the judges all know us. So it's a good relationship to have. Our practice is flourishing. I wanted to speak to you in support of the of Act 28 and appreciate that the legislature's gone ahead and included doctoral level psychologists in the doing competency evaluations as ordered by the court. Interestingly, we already do competency evaluations oftentimes as ordered and requested by attorneys or by other parties who come to us and say, this is an issue, please examine it. And so it's hardly the case that we don't do them. And in fact, we do them with juveniles and with developmentally disabled individuals all the time. So it's fairly well-known turf for us. We all are very actively engaged and have been for many years in a practice of ongoing clinical supervision with each other, with training that we do across the country. In fact, 2 of my partners are well into the process of becoming boarded. Interestingly, and I would say maybe Dr. Rovin isn't familiar with this fact, but there are no board certified forensic psychologists in Vermont right now. We hope to change that with 2 of my partners, but it's just not, they're just not available. They don't exist in Vermont. We also have a number of interns who've come through, including psychiatry interns from the University of Vermont, and we do a lot of teaching with them and learning from them as well. So it's a very dynamic, ongoing educational process. The points that I would make right now would be that I think that psychology offers a different discipline when it comes to doing competency evaluations than psychiatry. We all follow the same standards, and we look at the Dusky standard for how to define what competency is or is not. But psychologists bring a different toolkit to the table. We are extensively trained and it's part of our core training at the doctoral level and afterwards in the use of psychometrics, which is psychological testing. And in the world of forensic psychology, there's a whole set of specialized tools that look at things like malingering, symptom exaggeration, a host of memory problems that might exist. But we do this with objective tests, not impressions that you might get over a teleevaluation screen. We also do extensive work with collateral contacts and tracking down records to make sure that the information we're getting in front of our client that day is supported or not supported by others who know that person. So it's very important to get a full set of records, to talk to folks who know the client, and to have those objective information sources such as psychometrics. Psychiatrists, for all their benefits, don't access that same toolkit. They just don't. So I think we are offering something a little different. Now, it's my understanding that in Vermont right now, there's about a 6-month wait for a person who's referred for an evaluation, incompetency evaluation, if the Department of Mental Health has been asked to set it up. I think that's unfortunate. It probably is a constitutional problem in the case of access to courts for a speedy trial. And one of the advantages of what you've done with Act 28 is to open the door to a much speedier process by growing the pool of professionals who can do this work. I would argue that we can probably get an evaluation done in about 45 days if we, from beginning to end. And we're willing to go into the jails and doing it in person rather than looking at a television screen and asking the client to do the same. Some of these folks have a very difficult time with evaluations because they are paranoid. They don't know who else is watching. There's all kinds of issues that might come up. And the more impaired the client is, I would argue, the less likely they are to appreciate or perhaps act as they normally would in person when they're sat down by themselves in a room staring into a monitor. So my argument would be that in person is certainly better. We can do it tele-evaluations if we need to, but we prefer not to. Lastly, I would also say, and this goes to one of Dr. Robin's points, is that we are bound by a code of ethics in psychology as doctoral level licensed professionals to practice within our competence. It is probably a fine thing to work in a large institutional setting where you have a number of different support systems surrounding you, psychiatry, social workers, activities therapists, psychiatry. But the reality is in Vermont, most of us work in small clinics or alone. And the reality of the matter is that we do not have an ability, and this goes to one of the questions you asked, we don't really have the ability to co-administer a competency exam with a psychiatrist and a psychologist. That's just not going to happen in Vermont as a matter of practice because we just don't work that way. And setting it up would be, it's just not going to happen. So being able for us to offer to do this, what we would offer is being able to do it amongst ourselves with co-supervision and being able to provide a product in fairly short order that I think would be useful to the courts. So I'll stop talking and entertain any questions.
Thank you for being here this afternoon. So your practice has 4 individuals, 4 practitioners who are doing this already, these types of evaluations as requested by attorneys. Can you tell us in general, do you know how many folks, doctoral level psychologists there are in Vermont who do forensic evaluations?
Well, there's probably 5 or 6 others who are in Vermont or in the border states, mostly New Hampshire. And they will come in and do them as well. So there's 4 of us. There's probably a pool of 10 or so psychologists who might be available to do this kind of work.
And so right now, I'm presuming that I don't know whether it's defense attorneys or public defenders or state's attorneys asking for you said attorneys, I'm not sure which, but would you find any conflict in doing these evaluations for, I guess, quote unquote, a different customer, that being the courts?
Oh, not at all. In fact, we oftentimes, when we're in court testifying, the judges will ask us a whole set of questions that are unrelated to the evaluation because they're just interested and they trust us to give an honest opinion. Vermont, again, being a small state, you cross over your tail sometimes, and somebody who I may have worked on the other side for, a prosecutor say, may call us up and say, can you help us out with this case? Defense attorneys, we cross paths with people all the time. We do know them, and we operate in a high trust environment, I think, where we understand we're going to do the best we can, but I don't see a conflict of interest there.
Thank you.
Other questions for Dr. Powell? If Representative Emmons and then Representative,
Hi, Tom.
and then Senator.
I have a question in terms, you said there was a 6-month wait in terms of having a competency evaluation. But for the evaluation itself, how long does that take usually? Is it a matter of days? Is it 45 days? When you first start doing the evaluation for competency for a person, how long does that process take?
I think it depends a little bit on the individual. If the individual is not known to our system and doesn't have extensive records, we can go in and do a 3 or 4 hour evaluation in person, an interview and testing, and then track down collateral sources and what records there may be, and then produce a report probably in 30 days or 45 days if that's the time frame the court's asking for. We can be responsive to sometimes cases we'll get a hurry up request from somebody, and we honor that as best we can. But that's the general time frame I think we could work with in this case, and then of course be available to testify afterwards. When you're in California and doing telepsychiatry across the country, it's a little harder to get you into court and be able to describe to the court what you see going on and why you came to the conclusion you did about competency, and whether or not the court wants to. It's the court's decision to either find somebody competent or not competent, but we certainly talk about the conditions that support or don't support those findings.
Thank you.
I forgot where we were.
Thank you to both of you. I'm not sure who would like to answer this question, maybe both of you, but I understand there's this National Board of Forensic Evaluators that certify forensic mental health evaluators with a credential. And that would include clinical mental health counselors, social workers, marriage and family therapists, and some others. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that process as a way of increasing our work staff, a workforce in this realm, since it's difficult, if this has any legitimacy or not.
I'm sorry, I didn't pick up, I think the microphone may have been a little unclear. I didn't pick up the first part of your question. If you could just summarize it.
There's an organization called National Board of Forensic Evaluators that certify forensic mental health evaluators who are not doctorally prepared, it would appear. So I'm just curious to know what you think of the value of this process.
If they are not doctoral level, and I think that organization probably sponsors folks like that, they can be very well trained in many ways, but I think for psychology, a doctorate degree is an entry-level credential. Now, there are a lot of states, Vermont's one of them, which recognizes master's level practitioners, and they can do, I've known many of them who are excellent, but you do run into some trouble with, for instance, other allied professionals who have not 1 minute of psychometrics training or don't understand the science of psychology as we do. Because a doctoral degree teaches you about science and how the various statistical apparatus we use are how they're constructed, what the validity and reliability and standard error of measurement issues are. And so when we do this, we are able to discuss it in a way that's both reliable, valid, and ethical. I don't think that's necessarily the case with master's level folks. So I would be a little bit wary of that credential, such as it is, as opposed to a doctoral degree with commensurate education, training, and experience. I mean, I've got 35 years as a psychologist, and I've worked inside facilities. I've seen how people behave, in a maximum security cell versus how they might be in the community. It's a rich opportunity to see how context affects behavior, how people change over time. A person who is evaluated one day after they were arrested is going to look different than they look 30 days later after they've stabilized inside a facility for a while. And understanding how these processes work is terribly important to a comprehensive evaluation and an understanding for the court as to which direction to go in.
I would agree that the credential you mentioned, it's not one that I'm familiar with, and the gold standard for psychiatrists is board certification through the in forensic psychiatry through the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. And I'd also like to add that I agree wholeheartely with Dr. Powell that remote evaluations often do not capture the same richness and subtlety, and many people do not interact well with remote evaluators. It's my practice to reserve remote evaluations when there is no other or very little other option.
Thanks to both of you.
Thank you both. Other questions for Dr. Powell?
I do.
Senator Lyons, please.
Thank you, Dr. Powell. And in listening to Dr. Ravin, we heard that a suggestion about having oversight of the evaluations that take place. So you're thinking on that, especially as the changes happen and evaluators work for different folks. So any thoughts on the oversight of competency evaluations going forward?
Well, I think given the nature of most Vermont professional practices, practitioners, with the exception of those who are academically situated, generally work alone or in groups. We rely on group supervision as the oversight method. And I will tell you that I have been eviscerated on several occasions by my partners who have found mistakes, omissions, or commissions that I've committed when I've written a report and then presented it to them in our weekly staff supervision meeting. And I think that is the vehicle that we have found to be a real asset in our practice. People who work independently or solo, sometimes that's one of the curses of isolation. And I think, as Dr. Rovin pointed out, there's value in having people around you who can give you feedback and know what it is that should be done. And if there's an omission or an oversight or a different opinion, to get it there. But that's the nature of what oversight looks like in this business. It's really having other knowledgeable professionals be able to give you feedback on your work.
Thank you. And Dr. Ravin.
I hope that answered your question.
It does. It does very much so.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Were you asking a question of me? I heard my name.
Yes, I was just going to ask you to comment on Dr. Powell's response.
Yeah. So I would absolutely agree that peer supervision is really important and very useful and powerful tool. I'll also add that in Connecticut, there's a rigorous process of report forensic evaluation oversight within their Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. And this serves the function of having an expert reviewer look for quality and consistency and provide education to evaluators. And I think that's a really important piece, especially with court-ordered evaluations in a program that's overseen by the Department of Mental Health rather than individual practitioners and people who are practicing from group or individual private practices.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Just as a thought, it wouldn't, I see no reason why, if a psychologist were to prepare a report and submit it, that the Department of Mental Health would be certainly able to review it and provide that same kind of supervisory oversight that might be useful to, upholding. I agree completely that quality assurance is tremendously important.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Other questions? Thank you so much. Appreciate both of you being here and very helpful. Our next witness is Lauren Hibbert, who's with the Office of Professional Regulation. Lauren, apologies for the confusion. And I thank you so much for moving your schedule around to join us this afternoon.
Oversaw away from a conference at McMurray.
Oh, no.
Save me. Thank you.
We'll try to be as brief as possible.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I just want to say I am at a conference in Lake Maury. For the record, my name is Lauren Hibbert. I'm the Deputy Secretary of State. I am at the Town Clerks and Treasurers Association meeting at Lake Maury, and this was the spot that I was able to find, and I'm getting messages that my internet is unstable. So if I pause, that's what's happened, and I apologize. I'm happy to be here. As I understood it, you were interested in our psychology credentialing at the Office of Professional Regulation. We do license psychologists at the Office of Professional Regulation. As Mr. Powell said, we do so at the master's level and at the doctoral level. And we do not have a forensic certification in our statutes or rules. And that was the bulk of what I understood I was asked to testify about, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I'll ask a question.
Yes.
Do you think we need one?
I don't know if I'm the best person to ask that of, because I don't always understand in the community. My understanding is that there are psychologists in the state who are very well trained in this matter, who have a reputation to be well trained in this matter. Whether we need a state sponsored certification outside of a private certification, I'm not sure we need. And when I thought the meeting was going to be on October 12th, I was going to have the chair of our psychology board opine on this with consultation with the psychology board, but I didn't have that happen because of the date mix up.
Well, so I could just, infer perhaps that there haven't been complaints.
We have received complaints about psychologists who are doing forensic reviews. There is, we have done investigations on those complaints. I don't believe that we needed a forensic certification per se to do our enforcement actions based on those complaints.
Thanks.
That didn't give us anything more because there's there's national standards for forensic evaluations that we can use even though we don't have a forensic certification. Because we look at what is the standard the practitioner should be using while they're doing their evaluation. And that can change depending on whether it's a forensic evaluation or a sane evaluation, or an ability to stand, a sane meaning a post traumatic event, or whether it's a competency to stand trial evaluation. There are standards for all of those that we can use.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you so much, Lauren, and please get back to your conference. We appreciate
Okay.
it.
If there are follow-up questions or things that you folks want to know more of, please send the questions my way and I'll try and get the answer for you, particularly if
Wait. Okay. What's up?
Well, that happens.
It happens, yeah.
At least it's internet that's unstable. When I see that.
She's right over there.
Okay.
anyhow. So our job is to decide, if we're ready to decide, the committee charges, should Vermont law expand to allow doctoral level professionals other than a psychiatrist and psychologists trained in forensic psychology to conduct competency examinations of defendants pursuant to 13 VSA 4814 and recommend any changes that deemed advisable to 13 VSA, reflecting which professionals, if any, should be permitted to perform competency exams. Bottom line, who should conduct competency exams?
This was in a document that Dan put together
Yeah, we have
for us last time.
Oh,
Did that?
Dan, it's all your fault. Yes, it's on.
It's on the webpage.
Okay.
From the first meeting.
I'll just throw out there. Something that I've heard, right now, we're allowing doctoral level psychologists to do forensic exams for a year and then it sunsets. And I would recommend we get to sunset. That's what I would. I haven't heard any testimony on any other who would be able to do.
Does the current law, maybe Ben, you can answer this, does the current law require specialized training?
It just refers to forensic psychology,
Psychiatrist.
well, and psychiatrists.
Current law says only forensic psychiatrists.
No, but I'm talking about the 1 year, or whatever you want to call it.
There's really nothing about specialized training other than just create forensic psychology.
I mean, so, I mean.
I have a problem with special.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, it's being done for one group of individuals already. Certainly reducing access doesn't seem like that would be appropriate, but I guess being specific about, the specialized training would make sense to me. And then I think we need to think about whether or not, Dr. Robbins suggested, for the national certification. Right now, we don't have anybody with that national certification. So that would limit us, but, it might be something we should aspire to. And I did hear Dr. Powell speak of some of his colleagues are pursuing that now. One thing that I would want to not do is just have somebody say, oh, well, I've got specialized training. You know what I mean? It feels like there needs to be, something a bit.
I think that makes sense, but I'm not sure we should. One of the goals of this initial 1 year trial was that we had such a backlog of competency evaluations that people are ending up staying in jail awaiting the evaluation.
Yeah.
And which may not be the most appropriate place for it.
So what we could do is to look at what other states have done. We haven't, I don't think we've done that. That's one of our charges.
I think we did, and get us information about that.
They're, in that PowerPoint,
Oh,
there's just a brief overview, New York, Rhode Island.
Oh, right, I remember, yeah.
So quickly, New York allows for an exam to be performed by a psychiatric examiner. So that is either a qualified psychiatrist who's a member of the American Board or a certified psychologist who's registered as such under New York law. Rhode Island only allows for psychiatrists, not a psychologist, and then Oregon is very similar to New York, where a psychiatrist is one licensed by the medical board and who's completed a residency program in psychiatry, or a psychologist licensed by the Oregon.
When they say license, does that mean only in psychology, or does it mean in forensic, the sort of specialty of forensic evaluation?
Yeah, it did not specify that it had to be forensic.
Yeah.
Psychology, just that they're licensed by the board.
So I guess, the question is, even in the states that allow it, on the psychiatry side, you have to have the specialized training, but it doesn't really reference specialized training or certification on the psychologist side. And I just want to make sure that we're have a standard that is appropriate for comparable evaluations for comparable people seeking. So.
And Representative Wood on that point, so they use the term certified examiner in Oregon, which includes those two. Now, if I recall correctly, Oregon does have sort of a certified examiner program, if you will, where I think you can enter into and get a little bit more specialized training. But as far as their term for psychologists specifically, it only says that they have to be licensed, but there may have to be more that they do to become a certified. That makes
I
sense.
see what you're saying.
Yes.
So a question along these lines, and it may be for one of our witnesses. So when somebody comes in and is doing this evaluation, presumably they can be cross-examined as far as their competence in qualifications. So if somebody's just saying, yeah, I'm a forensic psychologist without really any kind of specialized training, that could come out during trial. And I wonder if I can just have if Dr. Powell's on still and Dr. Levine as well, so they can just comment on if that is in fact the case, that there is this check process in the court process itself.
Absolutely. When I've been asked to testify on competence to stand trial evaluations, I need to be qualified as an expert witness and can be cross-examined on my qualifications and procedure with performing evaluations and writing reports.
Exactly. And I oftentimes, I'm always qualified as an expert, and the cross-examination process, certainly can delve into my credentials, my experience, my training. And I'm always happy to talk about that, but it's something that is left to the other side's attorney that didn't hire me to do.
I appreciate that. And my point is, I'd rather not put additional obstacles to having individuals be able to do these, since we have already have a check on it. My point.
Yeah, I would agree. I would, and regardless, we're making a recommendation to committees of jurisdiction who are going to have the same conversation. But making a recommendation about some expertise in forensic psychology or in it, that makes a lot of sense. I can see Dr. Ryman behind you is ready to burst. Did you can you add to my comments?
Hearing the conversation, I wanted to add a piece of information that I think may be helpful. We all know that there is a backlog of competence to stand trial evaluations, people waiting for them. And I wanted to add that is not solely because there aren't enough evaluators. One of the main reasons for that backlog is that most forensic evaluators rely on both an interview and records about the individual's mental health treatment and other court and police records. And those are not always available to the evaluators. So that has been sort of a rate limiting step for many of us, that having those records available. Currently, an individual needs to give permission. The evaluee needs to give permission for the evaluator to have those records. So that's an important piece to the situation we're seeing now, where people are often waiting for evaluations.
Yeah, a question on that. Actually, for Ben, I thought that we dealt with the records issue in the S91 or whichever S89. I can't remember which number it was for competency evaluation. Wasn't that part of the bill?
Yeah. Give me a second.
Yeah, just double check that.
Yes, I believe that is so, and thank you for the reminder. The resolution of that.
I say something while we're waiting.
Good.
As part, I don't think this is part of our charge necessarily, but can we, add that we need a rigorous quality oversight of the evaluations as part of what we're doing? It sounds like that's maybe lacking a little bit.
At least some oversight.
Some
I mean, it
oversight.
sounds like there's professional board regulation and oversight, and whether additional data collection is needed, I guess is the
Well,
question.
there's internal supervision of the Novotel system.
Right. But that's it.
Yeah.
We're going to ask the committee's jurisdiction to evaluate, look at that area. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because there is rigorous cross-examination if the defendant doesn't like the results of the evaluation, or if the state doesn't like the results of the evaluation. So in a way, that's part of the process.
Well, I mean, I think there's a difference.
I think there's nothing wrong with putting something in there.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a difference in whether or not one party or not dislikes what the evaluation says versus whether it is a complete and well-performed evaluation. Does it meet the standards of what we would expect for an evaluation? So we can disagree with an evaluation, but if it was performed in the manner in which it should be, I agree. I don't think it should just be sort of internal, and it shouldn't be just, relying on colleagues to say, you kind of messed up on this one, or why didn't you think about this? Because one, not everybody works in a group. People should have the right to expect a certain standard of evaluation, I think. Next, I have to excuse myself. I have a 2:00.
I have to go too.
I think in Novotel, if we take a look at their contract with the state, that might also tell us something, because they are a really robust organization. And I think we can also build a lot of that into our contract with them.
I gotta go, so I'd like to get my 2 cents. Excuse me. I'm okay with the psychologist at the doctoral level. And I think maybe the committee jurisdiction can make the determination whether they have to have that forensic specialty. Okay?
But on October 24th.
Okay.
So just to answer Representative Luano's question, so yes, in S91, there was a provision added, subsection C, that an order issued for competency evaluation shall order the release of all relevant records to the examiner, including all juvenile, adult, or mental health and other health records. So that was clarified. And then something, just given the conversation that's going on, there was another provision added that says after the initial competency determination, the court may order subsequent evaluations to be performed by MH only upon showing of changed circumstances. And the court, in determining whether to order those evaluations, they consider treating the evaluator's clinical evidence and indicating whether or not the defendant's comments may have changed. So there's a little bit more explanation as to when those other evaluations can happen in court, but that's not necessarily, that doesn't go to the initial evaluation.
Thank you.
So what are we recommending here? To limit sunset?
Yeah.
On to psychologists? And then to look into possibly further training or being certified, or in that case?
So I think there's,
Certification.
aren't there two, there's either the certification, but separately the question of whether there's some oversight of it. I mean, that could be an either or a neither.
Well, the concept of oversight is not one I think that committees of jurisdiction discussed. So it might be helpful to ask the committees to review possible oversight.
Yep.
I don't think based on this testimony that we can make a recommendation. And we'd have to hear then from Mark Hibbert as well as folks who have already spoken.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
You suggested looking. But
Well, may involve record keeping.
Right.
Yeah.
but we're just specifically doctoral level psychologists who are trained.
Yes.
So we're not changing what, we're just lifting, in a sense, lifting the sunset, recommending we lift the sunset and recommending oversight, possibly.
Evaluation.
Is there anything else we recommend?
Karen Barber at DMH has said one of the biggest challenges to addressing the timeline, the barrier to getting folks in evaluation was the scheduling problems. I just want to revisit that in case you guys want to address it.
Well, fun. We'll give that to judiciary.
It may be, I'm sure, scheduling because
Yeah.
we know where
Part
they,
of schedule.
I understood that there were a lot of people who who are not incarcerated, who failed to show up for their evaluation. And that, you schedule a professional for a number of hours and people who are supposed to get the evaluation don't show up. So I don't know whether.
There's something about that in the bill. I think it's just a fine. What is it?
The court may issue a warrant for the rest of the defendant who, after receiving notice of an evaluation ordered under this section, fails to appear for the evaluation. So that's the stick, I guess, to try to get people to show up. And that was to address that scheduling issue.
And the staffing issue of not having someone to schedule it. Because remember, I said, oh, well, an Novotel can also do that for you. That's something they do. So just bringing that back to our top of mind. I don't know.
Well, it's a good question. We could raise a question when we send a message back to committees of jurisdiction to look into what's happening with scheduling at this point. What kind of staffing do they? Yeah.
Dave, you have?
Yeah, just for clarity, the lifting is the sunset lifting, is it a permanent lift or is it a lift and movement into the future? Okay.
I say lift it. Can lift it.
You can lift it, it's permanent.
Yeah, I'm comfortable. I'm not comfortable with other professionals doing the evaluation, but which was part of the question.
Right.
Do you have enough to put together a thing for the next meeting
Yeah, so,
for us to vote on?
yeah, so probably what, just.
I had to drag the 4 members of Health and Welfare Service, healthcare, I don't know. Pardon?
We have nothing else to do.
Yeah, what are you doing October 24th?
So essentially, it was just a letter to the committees of jurisdiction outlining these recommendations. One, lift the sunset on doctoral level psychologists trained in forensic psychology. Review any further certification requirements for those individuals. To examine oversight of psychologists. And
I think of evaluations, competency evaluations.
Yeah.
That's all.
And so for anybody that performs them.
Yeah.
So can I clarify? I thought I understood Dr. Powell to say that they were doing it, but they weren't forensically trained. And he said forensically. So are we wanting to exclude them from doing those court evaluations or not?
We just want to have the committees of jurisdiction understand what it means to provide oversight. And then,
Tom, did you want to comment?
I think going back to one of my earlier comments about our ethics demand that we conduct ourselves in a fashion that is within our range of competency, and that supervision and group feedback is actually part of the requirements of our relicensure each year. we have to have a certain number of hours of group supervision as part of what we do, 60 hours every 2 years of total CEUs, continuing education units, but a batch of those have to be done in the format where we're getting some sort of oversight. We don't have, it doesn't narrow it down beyond that. And of course, the licensure in psychology is a general license of just psychologist. There's no licensure for forensic psychologist. You have to go through this very elaborate and extensive process through Division 41 to become a board certified forensic psychologist. And it's probably 5% of all psychologists nationally go through it, and many of them are academics because there's a heavy academic component to that particular credential. So we see, it wouldn't surprise me at Yale that Dr. Rovin would have a number of folks there who have that credential, but out in the world, few of us do. But I think that's the best I can do in terms of answering the question.
I'm just trying to understand, sorry, about what I'm bringing back to healthcare. So could you just say what you said, your 3 things, just to make sure I understand?
Well, lift the sunset on doctoral level psychologist trained in forensic psychology.
But that's the part trained in forensic psychology because he's not, right? Am I misunderstanding?
Well, that's the current language in the statute.
I think
Okay,
trained is okay for us. I mean, that's trained, educated, and experienced in
forensic psychiatry, in
forensic
psychology.
psychology.
Okay.
I don't think credentialed is the problem.
Trained is okay. It's trained versus credential. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, and then that's the next point of review is to review any further certification requirement. And then the oversight of competency evaluations for everyone that performs them. And then finally to examine my work, the pitfalls of scheduling these examinations.
That's good.
You know, we're tired on that.
What we can either, if you all want to come to the next meeting as well, or we can send out and ask you to approve it.
Yeah, but what, we could send it out and then we could have at the beginning or some point in the meeting, have a vote so that everyone who.
Yeah.
We could do that on Zoom, can't we? We have 5 meetings, we could,
Yeah,
yeah,
well, they can come.
or they can come in person.
Yeah, it's either way.
What would the rest of the meeting be?
We're looking at the, for lack of a better term, the Woodside replacement. And there was supposed to be a report on September 1st, but we can't find that report. But there was a report on December 20th. Have you found the report?
No, you're referring to the last report I found was the one from December.
December, there was a December report, and I don't think they fulfilled much of what they promised in that report in terms of short-term stabilization program for youth who are, I'm going to use the term difficult to place, but difficult to place because there's no other place that'll take it. And I think other than opening a couple of beds in Brattleboro and maybe one somewhere else that.
And, for those that are here from the healthcare communities, the only thing that you're technically authorized to vote on would be the competency examinations, but.
Do we vote? I don't think we do.
Okay, so we are allowed to.
Well, the way it says is that you're allowed to participate. So participating, I mean.
Yeah, voting.
Okay, that's cool.
Be
So your input is fine on that issue if you want to.
I think we might have to debate that with Alice. I'm looking at her face.
I mean, participate, I wouldn't interpret that as voting, but participating, but
My colleagues and
I don't have a problem with you all participating. I think the more voices we have, the better. Subject is certainly the juvenile issues are.
Senator Seuss, I can talk to Eric too to see what the intent was behind that, since he drafted that language. Whether it was just vote or just to be a part of the discussion.
I think it happened in our committee. I'm not sure we discussed voting.
one area.
Participating in democracy.
Participating in democracy.
Like devil's advocate, there could be a potential problem if,
Okay.
let's say there is an insufficient number of justice oversight members to do it, and then it's brought over the top
Understood.
of you all. That could be an
Understood.
issue. So to be conservative and to play it safe, you could say just discuss and will not vote, unfortunately. So that could be playing it safe, but just flag that issue.
The other issue I wanted to discuss. Where do we want to go with prison? Mental health care.
Okay.
In prison.
Yeah.
No, that's the.
We want to make recommendations to the standing committees for oversight.
Yeah.
I don't think we've been doing oversight.
No, we haven't.
No, the way we've been doing it, well, we had that report about the individual, the cost per inmate is one of the highest in the country. We had that report. Our committee did look at that one.
Yeah.
And then we've been looking at MAT. We've been looking at reentry issues, but we haven't taken that whole look.
I would hope that healthcare committees could look at it. Prison healthcare as something that,
I would agree with that. I think that is a recommendation that Justice Oversight could make. And then but there are places where forensic care is significantly different from other care, but that really depends on workforce and other discrete issues. So I would say, yes, let's make that recommendation. And then as we go through a process of discussion in our committees, it'll be iterative with judiciary institutions. And we might be able to pull something together. It's a big deal. It's a really.
I don't think so I regret that we haven't, we've had 10 deaths this year.
It's not right.
And some things.
Yeah, and the one that we were talking at lunch about was significant. Recently,
Yeah, you mean the one,
in the 7 days big report.
oh, yeah.
I don't know if you guys have seen the recent reports, the surveys out of Southern that Urban Institute does with UVM. But Alice and I are on PRIN, the Prison Research and
Innovation Project.
And I'd encourage everyone to take a look at them. It shows that for both staff and inmates, mental health is their biggest area of concern.
Huge
And
concern.
hurt, and it's the biggest opportunity area is a nice way of putting it.
And that was a bill that we passed with former Commissioner Baker 2 sessions ago.
At least.
Was this huge committee that it's a committee of over 26. So we went through every letter of the alphabet for membership, but it was exactly about that. It was about mental health for those who are emergency responders, public safety, and we had some really compelling testimony. They now have an organization that brings folks together, but this is different. This is day-to-day needs. This is not a conference once a year. So I would be happy to have this problem sent to our committee, and I think probably House Healthcare would welcome it. We'll talk with Lori about that. And there are several different possible recommendations that we could make for oversight in the off session, including healthcare reform oversight, modifying that committee somewhat so it has more of a responsibility. So I think that's the biggest recommendation we can make for this at this time. Yeah.
And I think it's really important to make sure you have the corrections policy committees involved too, because corrections is so
Yeah.
difficult. It's not simple as you think it is on the surface, because there's a lot of layers there.
Well, exactly.
It's not
But I
simple.
think we need to broaden the look at
Yep.
throughout the legislative standing committees more than just your committee and mine. And I think that's important that Senator Lyons, that's why we put members of health and welfare and human services on this committee and institutions. Try to get that broader outlook.
It's hard for us to do that.
It's, but it really bothers me
Go ahead.
when we've been to the prisons,
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of confidence in some of the medical professionals.
Wow.
And I'm saying that publicly. I don't know if we'll get to visit a prison this year, but
Well, also the clinic within the prison, there were some really good things that we saw.
Yeah.
And then there's some very concerning things.
and yet the prison is being asked to deal with more and more complex medical issues beyond mental health, dementia, kidney dialysis, et cetera.
So one question I also have is when there's a situation occurring off duty, basically, let's say it's on a weekend or it's 2:00 in the morning, and there's a situation in terms of a healthcare, mental health or healthcare situation that occurs in a facility. And it's the staff that's with WellPath needs a higher up person to make a decision. And is that person there specifically for that facility, or is there just one person that WellPath has as a supervisor for the whole contract? And are they available?
I think Ben has the answer.
Well, on the dozens. I know that under the previous contract, not with WellPath currently, there was one on-call clinician, I want to say for all facilities throughout the state. And I think there are some practical implications with that, how do they have access to real-time records to view the patient that, is in need of care? Or are they just going by what is being communicated to them by the on-call, by the nurse that's at the facility? So, those are some considerations of what's the level of staffing, the level of knowledge, the level of access to the records. Can they access things electronically to see the patient's history, or is it just an oral recitation of the situation? And I don't know about WellPath, but I do know under the previous provider.
Well,
it
the
was just a
contract, yeah,
single-
the contract with WellPath is pretty clear that all those records must be available at the time of an incident. So,
We contact Annie or Isaac, and ask them questions.
The other thing too that we talked about this morning, in hearing the DOC, if we went into having DOC provide the healthcare with state employees, the cost, they said 80 to 100 million. Ginny, you brought up that you're looking to partner with Diva or other pharmaceutical entities to work with in terms of lowering the price. They hadn't looked at that. So that could be a direction for the standing committee to take a look at. Right. Another,
Diva will probably.
I know, but then another thing, should the state cover or put in place things that WellPath is doing?
Right. Well, this is exactly the kind of conversation that needs to happen going forward. And as Annie Romanescu said, we're leading the country. We're at a place where we can offer some
Right,
leadership.
sad state of affairs.
Well, it is.
Yes.
And the other part that's sad about it is that our new contract, they've never done this before either. So it's going to take a lot of us working together on this. It's not going to be one part of the administration or one part of the legislature. We're going to have to all
No, but
chip in on it.
It is, and I really applaud all of you for really bringing mental health into the top of the conversation, because I think in a lot of places it hasn't been for whatever reasons historically. And I think now people are starting to really be more comfortable having that conversation. And I think the data is there that says this is a healthcare issue, it's a public health issue. And thanks for making sure that we address it.
So is this going to be on our agenda next time, or how are we handling it?
Well, I think the majority of the agenda will be on the wood side.
Okay.
That, but I think we should probably schedule an hour for a follow-up discussion on the recommendations on prison healthcare and the psychology.
Whatever it is.
I'm just gonna say the sunset.
Oh, the sun's.
A couple letters for the committee to review.
Yeah,
And then just when it comes to the prison healthcare recommendations, right now, is it just sort of recommendation to judiciary committees, the corrections institution committees, the healthcare committees on a holistic review of the prison healthcare system?
I think we've got to list something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I think
it belongs in healthcare.
I think it's health, I'm not sure in the House, but in the Senate, it'd be health and welfare as opposed to judiciary, but a particular focus on mental health issues.
And substance.
Corrections and institutions at the
And
table.
substance abuse.
You really need both at the table.
So I had to skip out this morning because I had another meeting and we're continuing work on the blueprint, which, you know, with the hub and spoke, and we're also expanding it now to more broadly to mental health. So I was meeting about that. So there is a lot that we're doing that within the healthcare environment, including then also looking at our PBM, our pharmaceutical benefit manager, and all of those little things that might fit in and bring the prison healthcare as not prison healthcare. There's some forensic piece to it, but to make more, to link things together so that healthcare is healthcare, regardless of where you are. That would be a good goal.
It seems like the state directed or healthcare is healthcare.
Senator.
I don't want to interrupt this very, very important conversation.
Yes, sir.
Don't, I digress somewhat.
Okay.
We sent a letter to Dr. Mark Levine. Did we get any response or anything on that reference to the PIPs?
I never received anything.
For what? I've just had a.
The public inebriation program throughout the state.
I never received anything.
I think he's ignoring.
That people ignore it because it's a big, they have to change what they're doing now and DOC's the default.
So he didn't even respond.
I didn't get it.
Nothing that I received.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was sent by
Thank you for
email.
raising that.
Yeah, good point.
Thank you. Could we resend the message in case you didn't get it?
Yeah, I'll follow.
Why don't we send a copy to Kelly,
Okay.
deputy?
See, when you hear about a person who is in a correctional facility in booking that dies, and the first thought that came through my mind was, well, was the person there is a incapacitated person because he was in booking, you know, and it wasn't, it was a detainee.
Wasn't?
No, it wasn't, it was a detainee, but it wasn't an incapacitated.
Oh,
person.
no, but he was in the booking.
He was in the booking, but when you first read it, the person's in booking, I mean, that's the person that came into my mind, and this could happen quite easily. It's not our incapacitated population now, it's not just somebody sleeping it off who's inebriated. Yeah. And what's happening with corrections, they're having folks come in, even detainees are coming in, and they don't know what substance are in their bodies. Right. That's what's starting
Happened
to
in the
happen.
Bennington Police Department.
Well, the 7 days article really shines a light on how the system failed so many times and in so many different ways. That, you know, that's the tragedy, is like, it's just
But
one,
this particular person,
yeah,
that,
well, yeah,
what,
the roommate, the cellmate.
oh, this, yeah.
Oh. Anyway.
So for the next agenda, if we could have, I think I already talked about moving RDAP for 15 minutes, 8 times.
Yes, thank you for reminding me of that.
Just to, to get an update on what RDAP is up to. Right, thanks.
I'm still unclear as to what my chair would like me to do, Senator Weeks. Would you like us here on the 24th or,
It's up to you,
okay,
totally.
you will be here?
Okay.
Okay,
Not on the 24th,
I thought it was October 24th.
October 24th.
Yeah, October.
That's our next meeting.
24th is my birthday. I'm not going to be anywhere.
October 24th.
October 24th.
I can circulate the letters too ahead of the meeting, that way,
Yeah.
you all are aware of what's in it and can chime in with any comments.
Actually, I think it's.
We'll leave it up to you, Mark. Want to come or want to do it?
With that, or-
Want to do, we'll schedule,
Just to get an update.
like a half an hour or when you can be part of the meeting or the whole meeting. I don't know.
I am.
It's been helpful to have all of you here, actually.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
It's October 26th.
October 26th.
Wait a minute.
26th.
I gotta write it down.
It's October 26th.
I think Peggy's changing the date on it.
No, I'm not. Should I go up my sentences?
Yeah.
I have the 20.